welcome to Catholic Current, where we give you an update on events affecting the Church in the United States. From Washington, D.C., I'm Mara Moser. The president of the USCCB, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, has written to the leaders of Congress calling for bipartisan action to bring an end to government shutdowns. He also asked that Congress enact a just budget that reduced unsustainable deficits, protects poor and vulnerable people, advances the common good, and promotes human life and dignity. Here to discuss the letter is Anthony Granado, USCCB Associate General Secretary. Thank you for joining us, Anthony.
Thank you, Maura. Glad to be here. Appreciate it.
So it is Thursday, and
Yes.
a government shutdown may be imminent. What's happening?
Well, just like you said, it's imminent. Congress has until midnight Saturday to come to an agreement. And there are competing agreements between the House and the Senate. Both are trying to figure out how to move this forward. The House has put together a proposal, but they're asking for extra pieces of legislation to apply to this continuing resolution. The continuing resolution is simply to keep the government funded while they work out an agreement for long-term funding for next year. The Senate has its own proposal, and if they don't come to an agreement by midnight Saturday, beginning at 12:01 Sunday, the government will shut down.
One of the sticking points has to do with a border bill that some members of Congress would like to be part of the funding of the government. Can you tell us about that and the bishop's opposition?
Yeah, the bill, H.R. 2, was a Border Security Act bill, came out of the House of Representatives. The USCCB opposed the bill, rightfully so, back in May. Several members of the Freedom Caucus in the House would like to attach it as a condition to pass this continuing resolution in the House. The USCCB rightfully opposed the bill because it would enhance harmful policies, including further detention of migrant children, expulsion of persons, enhanced detention policies that would be harmful, it would undermine the asylum process. And then lastly, one thing that has created a lot of controversy is the bill contains a provision that would prevent and bar federal funding to nonprofit organizations, including the Church. So the Catholic Church is a key partner with the federal government, with state government and others, to welcome people and respond to the increasing needs at our border and throughout the country. But even beyond the border, the funding that could be impacted would include disaster response. Catholic charities agencies, for example, key ministries of the bishops, are one of the key partners with the federal government to respond to disasters. So adding this to the bill is something we oppose and we think is counterproductive.
As you've mentioned, a government shutdown may be imminent. What is the impact of a federal government shutdown?
Well, you basically would have a furlough of government employees. Some are exempt, of course, in very key positions in the military or intelligence and others. But you would have, for example, the WIC program, the Supplemental Nutritional and Assistance Program for Women, Infant, and Children, a very pro-life program we support that helps pregnant mothers and their newborns. They would lose funding the first week after going into a shutdown. They bring their cards to their stores. They would not be able to access those funds for nutrition assistance. Depending how long the shutdown goes, you would have further impact on food stamps or the SNAP program. Medicare recipients could be impacted. But you're looking at a third of the workforce just in this area would be immediately sent home without pay. So you're looking at the impact on families, working families, but also the local economy. So overall, a shutdown is not something we support, because we remind people, the bishops remind people, that our budgets and how we spend money are moral decisions that have very human impacts.
Very good. Well, let's hope that they're able to avert this government shutdown and come to an agreement that is just. Thank you very much for being here, Anthony.
Thank you, Maura.
Last week, there was an historic meeting of Catholic Indigenous organizations with bishops and staff from episcopal conferences of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. The International Conference on Catholic Indigenous Ministry was a remarkable occasion of dialogue, learning, and fellowship for those who work with Indigenous communities in the Catholic Church. We spoke with Bishop Mark Hageman of Canada about the event and how the Church can help.
This might sound simplistic, but it came up a lot in the conference, a ministry of presence. So, it's relatively easy for non-Indigenous people to come up with pastoral plans, and those are important. And it was great to hear that there's work being done on a framework here in the United States. In Canada, I suppose the Truth and Reconciliation process, which was beyond the church, but it ended up having calls to action, as I mentioned earlier, that some of them addressing the church context specifically, that has actually been the basis for a kind of a framework for us. And so some of those calls to action address, and again, there are issues for the church, but beyond as well, health and education, ways in which there is more education and formation for non-Indigenous people, including those working in the church in ministry roles, clergy and laity, to become aware of everything from the history of residential schools, some of the cultural features of especially Indigenous groups and spirituality and identity in the local regions as a basis to help animate and provide more respectful pastoral ministry and outreach. So that's a big starting point. There's other things in terms of youth and young adult ministry outreach. But a big theme that also came up in our conversation, I think, was the theme, not for us, but with us.
Yeah.
And so to not jump to kind of conclusions about what that ministry would look like, but to be involved in a conversation, dialogue, and a working together to implement some of these things.
Last week, Pope Francis traveled to participate in the Mediterranean meetings in Marseille. He prayed for those who have died in the Mediterranean Sea.
Dinanzi a noi c'è il mare, fonte di vita,
Before us is the sea, a source of life.
via dei naufragi.
Yet this place evokes the tragedy of shipwrecks which cause death.
In memoria di coloro che non ce l'hanno fatta.
We are gathered in memory of those who did not make it, who were not saved.
Non abituamoci a considerare i naufragi
Let us not get used to considering shipwrecks as news stories and deaths at sea as numbers. No, they are names and surnames.
e storie. Sono vite
They are faces and stories.
sogni infranti.
They are broken lives and shattered dreams.
He went on to praise those who help rescue and welcome migrants attempting the treacherous crossing. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Catholic Current. You can find out more about any of this week's topics by visiting us online at usccb.org or follow us on social media at USCCB. I'm Mara Moser. See you next week.